10 million years ago, there were no cities, no names, no humans, just forests stretching forever, filled with creatures that would one day become us. The world was dangerous, unpredictable, and constantly trying to erase everything that lived. Volcanoes exploded, continents cracked apart, and whole species vanished without a trace. And somehow, through all of that, a tiny line of life survived. A few clever apes who learned to stand, to think, to fear, and to hope. Every single one of us exists because they did not give up. We should not even be here. Statistically, mathematically, by every rule of chance, humanity should have vanished millions of years ago. But we didn't. We adapted. We endured ice, drought, predators, and the collapse of entire worlds, and still kept going. If you trace your family tree back far enough, every ancestor you have faced, extinction, and won. Every single breath you take right now is part of a miracle that began long before humans even had names. So how did we survive the impossible? How did the weakest creatures on Earth outlast the fire, the flood, and the void of time itself? That's the story we're going to tell. If you're listening to this before sleep, that's exactly why I make them. So, subscribe maybe, and tell me where you're watching from. I always love seeing the comments, like Sydney in the morning, London after lunch, and New York just before midnight, all sharing the same thought that somehow, against every cosmic odd, we are still here. Imagine standing on the edge of time, looking back at the chain of impossible chances that led to this very moment. Every breath you take, every beat of your heart, exists because a billion random events lined up in perfect sequence. It is almost a miracle that you are even here. 10 million years ago, the Earth was not the calm blue world you see in photographs. It was wild, unpredictable, and deadly. The planet shook, burned, flooded, and froze without warning. Whole species vanished overnight. If the balance of the atmosphere had tilted by the smallest degree, or if a single volcanic eruption had lasted a little longer, the creatures that would become us might never have survived. Life itself could have ended as quietly as it began. Yet something invisible kept it going, a thread so thin it could have snapped at any moment. That thread is the story of survival. Every living thing you see today is part of that unbroken line. But for humans, the line was nearly cut countless times. We were never the strongest, the fastest, or the most numerous. What kept us alive was not power, but persistence. In a world built to destroy, we learned to adapt, to hide, to wait, and to imagine. Somewhere in a forgotten forest, our ancestors watched lightning set a tree ablaze. They feared it, but they also saw something more. Light in darkness, warmth in cold, hope in chaos. That spark of awareness was the beginning of everything. But before that, survival was luck. Entire species depended on a shift in weather, a hidden cave, or a single seed that sprouted in dry soil. There were no guarantees. Nature did not care. It created and destroyed with equal force. Yet somehow, through the storms and the silence, life refused to vanish. Think about that. Every ancestor you have ever had, from the first single cell floating in an ancient ocean to the first human who looked at the stars, survived just long enough to pass life forward. Not one of them failed. Every mother gave birth before dying, every father found food before starving, every child lived just long enough to continue the story. If even one had not, the line would have ended. You would not be here. That is the invisible line of survival, stretching back through time, fragile yet unbroken. When you look at the world today, filled with cities, lights, and noise, it is easy to forget how close we came to disappearing. The fact that humanity exists at all is not just evolution. It is luck beyond reason. It is chance sharpened by will. The earth has tried to erase us again and again, but something within us refused to vanish. That refusal, that spark that kept the line alive, is what makes our story not just scientific, but sacred. And that is where this journey begins. 10 million years ago, before we had a name, the Earth looked like a different planet. The air was heavier, the forests deeper, and the sounds of life echoed through endless green canopies. Great rivers carved through valleys that no human eyes had ever seen. The world belonged to creatures that moved on four limbs, swinging between branches, searching for fruit, and fighting to survive. They were not yet human, but in their eyes, the spark of something new was beginning to flicker. Climate change was already shaping destiny. Africa, once covered in thick rainforests, began to dry. Trees died, grasslands spread, and food became harder to find. What had been a safe world of leaves and shade turned into an open, dangerous land. It was not intelligence that saved our ancestors then, but desperation. They were forced to leave the trees, to walk upright, to search farther and think faster. Every step on that burning ground was an act of survival. Imagine the fear of standing under the open sky for the first time. No branches to hide in, no canopy to protect from predators. Just endless grass, wind, and the eyes of hunters watching from the shadows. Yet, somehow, these fragile beings learned to adapt. They learned to scan the horizon, to use stones as tools, to work together. These were the earliest experiments in what would one day be called humanity. But back then, there was no name, no language, no history, only life clinging to existence. The world around them was in chaos. Volcanoes erupted, the air filled with ash, and rain vanished for years at a time. Entire regions became deserts. Species that had ruled for millions of years disappeared. The ground cracked, the sky dimmed, and still, those small creatures endured. It was not strength that kept them alive, but flexibility. They learned to eat new foods, to change habits, to migrate. Tiny genetic changes, random and unseen, began to shape the brain, the hands, the vision. Over thousands of generations, a few lucky mutations gave rise to something remarkable: curiosity, awareness, the ability to remember, to plan, to imagine. Those small differences became the foundation of everything that followed. When one ancestor picked up a broken rock and used it to open a seed or crack a shell, they did not know it. But they had taken the first step toward invention. It was not genius, it was survival. Every choice, every movement, every birth was another thread in the long web of evolution. 10 million years may sound like an impossible distance, but it lives within every cell of your body. The story of before we had a name is not just ancient history, it is your story too. The DNA that once fought through heat and hunger still flows through your veins. You are the result of their persistence, their luck, their will to live. Before we were human, we were hope in motion. Long before humans walked the earth, the planet itself seemed determined to destroy everything that lived upon it. It was a world that tested every form of life, crushing the weak and remaking the strong. Mountains erupted in fire, skies darkened with ash, and oceans boiled under the force of invisible currents. It was as if Earth were a living creature, one that breathed through storms and spoke through earthquakes. Every few million years, something catastrophic happened that could have ended everything. Entire forests vanished beneath lava. Continents split apart. The air turned toxic. To survive in that kind of world was not a right, it was a miracle. Imagine standing where no human has ever stood, feeling the ground shake beneath your feet. The sky turns red, the air smells like burnt stone, and a rain of ash falls for days. This was not fantasy. It was reality for countless species before us. Volcanoes wiped out entire ecosystems. Oceans rose and swallowed coastlines. The temperature of the planet swung between unbearable heat and deadly cold. Life was caught in the middle, constantly rebuilding itself from the edge of extinction. Scientists believe there were moments when almost all life disappeared, leaving behind only a few survivors hiding in small corners of the world. One of the most terrifying forces was from beyond our planet. Massive rocks drifting through space, silent and invisible, sometimes crashed into Earth with the power of billions of bombs. When they struck, they set forests ablaze, turned oceans into steam, and covered the planet in darkness. It is believed that one such event, around 66 million years ago, ended the age of dinosaurs, clearing the way for mammals to rise. But that was not the only time it happened. Impacts both large and small continued through the ages, shaping the planet and testing the limits of survival. Even the climate seemed to conspire against life. Ice ages froze the land solid for thousands of years. Then came waves of heat that melted glaciers and flooded the world. Storms stronger than anything we know today ripped across entire continents. Lightning struck endlessly, forests burned, and dust filled the air so thickly that sunlight could barely reach the ground. And yet, even through this chaos, life refused to vanish. Deep in the oceans, near boiling vents, microscopic organisms clung to the rock, feeding on minerals and heat. On land, creatures adapted, evolved, and endured. Every disaster became a lesson written into the language of DNA. Without those trials, humans might never have existed. It was the constant struggle, the endless rebuilding, that forced life to grow more creative. What makes Earth so extraordinary is that it is both destroyer and creator. Every extinction carved room for something new. Every fire gave way to new growth. The planet that tried to kill us also made us who we are. It taught life to bend without breaking. And in the quiet spaces between destruction, it allowed just enough peace for something extraordinary to begin. There are moments in the history of our planet when the sky itself turned against life, when the heavens burned and the world below changed forever. Scientists call these impact events, but to the creatures who lived through them, they were nothing short of apocalypse. Imagine a rock larger than a city, traveling faster than a bullet, tearing through the sky. In seconds, it glows hotter than the sunday. When it hits the ground, it releases more energy than every bomb humanity has ever built combined. The earth shakes, oceans rise into the air, and fire spreads in all directions. This is what happened about 66 million years ago in what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula. That single moment ended the reign of the dinosaurs and gave mammals a chance to rise. But that event was only one of many. The universe has never stopped throwing dice at our fragile planet. Smaller impacts have struck countless times, leaving scars that can still be seen in the land today. Each one altered the course of evolution in ways we are only beginning to understand. Some wiped out species completely, others opened doors for new life to emerge. These impacts were not just random acts of destruction. They were part of a cosmic rhythm, a reminder that our planet moves through a universe filled with silent threats. Even when no asteroids struck, the sky still brought danger. There were bursts of cosmic radiation, waves of energy from distant stars that may have stripped away parts of our atmosphere. Some scientists believe these invisible storms caused mass extinctions by disrupting the delicate balance of life. Others think they triggered mutations that shaped the DNA of future generations. Either way, the message is clear. Life on Earth has never been safe. Every living thing exists under a sky that can change from beautiful to deadly in an instant. Picture what it must have looked like on that day when the sky fell. The ground shaking, trees bursting into flame, animals running in every direction, the sun disappearing behind a cloud of dust that would last for years. Temperatures dropped, food vanished, and the world grew silent. Yet even in that silence, a few survivors held on. Tiny mammals hiding underground, fish deep in the oceans, seeds waiting in the soil. When the darkness finally lifted, they were the ones who began again. Every human alive today carries the legacy of those survivors. Without them, there would be no cities, no history, no story to tell. the scars of those ancient impacts still whisper their warning. The universe is vast and unpredictable. The same sky that gives us warmth and light can also bring extinction. But maybe that is what makes life so powerful. Against all odds, it endures. Even when the sky falls, something always finds a way to rise again. There was a time when Africa was covered in endless forests, a world of green where our distant ancestors lived high in the trees, surrounded by fruit, shade, and safety. But the earth began to change. Slowly, the rain stopped coming, the air grew hotter, and the forests began to die. What had once been thick jungle turned into dry grasslands and cracked earth. The great droughts had begun. For creatures who had never touched the ground for long, this was the beginning of terror. Food became scarce, and the cool shadows of the canopy disappeared. The primates that would one day become human faced a choice they never wanted to make: stay in the dying trees and starve, or step down into the open plains where predators ruled. Some stayed, and their story ended there. Others climbed down and walked. It was not bravery that drove them, but desperation. The moment their feet touched the ground, everything changed. The world beneath the trees was vast, hot, and full of danger. There were lions, snakes, and no safe place to hide. But there was also something else: opportunity. Those who learned to travel farther found food in roots, seeds, and small animals. They began to notice patterns, the way shadows moved, the sound of water carried by the wind. Their eyes adjusted to the horizon, their hands reached for tools, and slowly thought became a weapon. The droughts did not just dry the land, they shaped the mind. When survival depended on memory and planning, intelligence became the difference between life and death. Each generation that followed was slightly better at solving problems, slightly faster at learning. Over time, those small advantages grew into something extraordinary. These early humans began to work together, warning each other of danger, sharing food, and following the stars across the plains. Fire became their comfort at night, their only defense against the cold and the darkness. And in that glow, something new began to form: imagination. They started to dream, to remember, to wonder. Every hardship taught them to think in new ways. The droughts that once seemed like a curse became the forge that created humanity. Without them, there might never have been curiosity, invention, or speech. The dry winds of Africa carved more than the shape of the land. They carved the human mind. It is strange to think that everything we call civilization began with thirst. But that is the truth written in the bones of our ancestors. The great droughts forced them to adapt, to innovate, to become something new. They learned that survival was not about strength, but about the ability to imagine a different way to live. And from those dusty plains, the first sparks of what we now call human intelligence began to glow. Long before humans learned to control fire, the world burned without mercy. Lightning cracked across the African plains, striking trees and sending walls of flame racing across the dry grass. To the early hominins watching from a distance, it must have looked like the wrath of the sky itself. The heat roared, the ground shook, and animals fled in every direction. Fire was alive. It moved, it breathed, and it destroyed. For countless generations, it was something to fear. Those who wandered too close were blinded, burned, or consumed. But even fear has lessons to teach. After the flames passed, the world changed. The ground was black and warm. The air smelled of smoke and ash. The bodies of animals that had been trapped by the fire were left behind, cooked by heat. The first creatures that dared to taste the meat found something incredible. It was soft, rich, and easy to chew. It gave more energy than raw plants or flesh. That discovery may have been the first moment when fear turned into curiosity. Over time, they learned to follow the fires. They watched for lightning, waited for the flames to fade, and searched the burnt land for food. This was not yet mastery. but it was the beginning of a relationship that would change everything. The fire that once terrified them had become a teacher. It showed them light in darkness and warmth in cold. It revealed that destruction could also bring renewal. Plants grew faster in burned soil, and the ashes kept insects away. Fire, they began to realize, was not just an enemy, it was a force that could be understood. Eventually, someone did what no creature had ever done before. They carried a burning branch. Maybe it was by accident, a stick picked up from the edge of the ashes that still glowed. Or maybe it was deliberate, a moment of courage and curiosity stronger than fear. They brought the fire home, into the night, where it crackled and danced, casting shadows on the cave walls. For the first time, the darkness was broken. Fire became safety. It kept predators away, it cooked food, and it gathered people together. Around those flames, language began to form. Stories were told, plans were made, the world suddenly seemed bigger and brighter. The fire that wasn't ours became part of us, but it never stopped being dangerous. Every spark carried the memory of its wild beginnings. Even now, thousands of years later, we still feel its pull, its beauty, and its power. It is both creation and destruction, life and death. To master, it was to take the first true step toward civilization. And to this day, every time we light a flame, we are repeating that same ancient act, calling back the power that once belonged only to the storm. In the heart of Africa lies a scar across the land, a place where the earth has been slowly pulling itself apart for millions of years. It is called the Great Rift Valley, and within its deep canyons and ancient layers of rock, the story of humanity has been buried piece by piece. Here, scientists have uncovered the bones of our ancestors, fragments of skulls, jaws, and footprints that whisper the truth of how close we came to disappearing forever. Every fossil found in that dry soil is a survivor's memory. Each one represents a being that managed to live long enough to continue the fragile thread of life. When you look at those bones, you are not just seeing the past, you are seeing the evidence of miracles. Some of the most famous discoveries were made here. In the 1970s, the skeleton of a small female hominin named Lucy was uncovered in Ethiopia. She walked upright more than 3 million years ago, long before humans existed. Her bones told us that standing tall came before large brains or tools. It was survival first, intelligence later. But for every Lucy that survived, countless others did not. The Rift Valley is filled with the remains of species that were close to becoming human but never made it. They were wiped out by droughts, disease, and competition. Some lived for hundreds of thousands of years and then vanished completely. If even one of our direct ancestors had fallen to the same fate, the story of humanity would have ended before it began. What makes the Great Rift Valley so haunting is that it shows how evolution is not a steady climb upward. It is a narrow path full of dead ends. Some branches of our family tree flourished for a time before collapsing. Others barely appeared at all. The distance between survival and extinction could be as small as one generation. And yet, against all odds, a few lineages endured. They learned to adapt to the shifting landscape, to find water when rivers dried, and to seek shelter when the world burned with heat. It was in these struggles that the shape of humanity was carved. When scientists brush dirt away from a fossilized skull, they are touching the silence between eras. They are touching the proof that existence is fragile, but persistence is stronger. The rift does not just hold bones, it holds memory, written in stone and dust. Every layer of rock is a page from a book, written by time itself. It reminds us that we were never guaranteed to survive, that our ancestors walked through 1,000 chances to vanish, and yet they did not. The Great Rift Valley is more than a place of discovery. It is a reminder that life's edge is always razor thin. Every breath we take today rests on the bones of those who refuse to disappear. There was no single moment when our ancestors suddenly decided to stand upright. It was not a choice made out of pride or progress. It was a choice made out of desperation. The forests that once protected them were disappearing, and the open plains offered no safety. To survive, they had to see farther, move faster, and use every advantage they could find. Standing up was not a symbol of victory. It was a last resort born from hunger, danger, and chaos. Imagine a world where survival depended on the smallest change. The sun beat down on the dry savannas, and predators ruled the land. To stay alive, early hominins needed to find food before others did and spot danger before it was too late. By rising on 2 feet, they could scan the horizon for threats and opportunities. They could carry food, tools, or even infants while moving from one patch of shade to the next. At first, it must have felt strange and unstable, but the benefits were enormous. Over time, those who could stand and walk upright survived longer. They passed on their strength and balance to their children, and slowly, the shape of the body began to change. The spine curved, the pelvis shifted, and the feet flattened. Walking on 2 legs became natural. What had once been an act of survival became the foundation of everything human. Yet even then, standing up was dangerous. It made our ancestors slower than most animals. It exposed them to the sun and made them easier to see. To make up for that weakness, they needed new skills. They learned to cooperate, to share food, and to warn each other of danger. Bipedalism did not make them conquerors. It forced them to become thinkers. Each step demanded awareness, planning, and trust. In this new way of life, intelligence was not a luxury. It was survival. Some scientists believe that walking upright also freed the hands to create tools, to throw stones, and to shape objects. That simple shift from 4 legs to 2 opened the door to invention. From that moment on, the body and the mind began to evolve together. The day we stood up was not the day we became powerful. It was the day we began to learn what it meant to endure. Every movement forward was uncertain, every mile a test. But those fragile steps changed everything. They connected us to the horizon, to exploration, and to the idea of moving beyond fear. When you walk today, you are echoing that first act of courage. The ground beneath your feet carries the memory of millions of years of struggle. Standing was not the beginning of dominance. It was the beginning of awareness. It was the first time life looked forward instead of down, and in that small act of defiance, the future of humanity began. There was a time when humanity almost ended before it even began, not from war or disease, but from chance. The story of life has always been a game played by the universe, with dice rolled in storms, fires, and floods. For early humans, survival was not guaranteed. It was a genetic gamble, a series of near misses and narrow escapes that left only a few to carry the story forward. Scientists have found evidence that there were moments when the entire human population dropped to just a few thousand individuals. That is smaller than most modern towns. Imagine that. Every person alive today could trace their ancestry back to a handful of survivors who lived through disasters powerful enough to erase almost everything. These moments are called bottlenecks, points in time when the flow of life nearly stopped. One of the most extreme examples may have happened around 75,000 years ago, when a massive volcanic eruption known as the Toba event darkened the sky for years. Ash spread across continents, temperatures fell, and food became scarce. Plants withered, animals died, and the humans who survived were forced to adapt or vanish. Some sought shelter in coastal regions, where fish and shellfish offered the only source of food. Others migrated to find warmth and light. In that darkness, small families held on, passing their genes, their stories, and their hope to the next generation. Every breath they took mattered, because every child they raised helped keep the human line alive. It is humbling to think that all of us exist because they did not give up. But luck played as much of a role as strength. Evolution is not fair. It does not choose who lives or dies based on merit. Sometimes, the difference between extinction and survival is as small as where you stand when disaster strikes. A change in weather, a shift in wind, a single river flowing a different way can decide the fate of an entire species. These genetic bottlenecks left marks in our DNA. They are like fingerprints of crisis, showing that humanity was once fragile enough to disappear completely. Yet they also reveal something else, something powerful. When life was reduced to its smallest number, creativity and cooperation became our greatest tools. Early humans began to share resources, form stronger communities, and develop communication that helped them endure. The very pressure that nearly destroyed us became the reason we evolved into thinkers and problem solvers. The genetic gamble did not end in extinction, it ended in resilience. Every person alive today carries within them the echoes of those few who made it through. Their courage, their adaptability, and their luck live on in every heartbeat. We like to imagine ourselves as destined to rule the earth, but the truth is much more fragile. We are the descendants of survivors who beat impossible odds. Life did not choose us. We just refused to lose the game. When the sun fell and darkness took the land, early humans faced their most ancient enemy, the night. The world after sunset was full of danger. Eyes glowed in the distance, the wind carried sounds of movement, and the shadows seemed alive. It was in this darkness that the first firekeepers became guardians of survival. Fire was more than light. It was safety, warmth, and the center of everything that made us human. Around its glow, the tribe gathered close, not only to stay warm but to stay connected. The flickering light drew people together when everything else tried to tear them apart. In that circle of heat and smoke, a miracle began to form, the birth of cooperation. Those who kept the fire alive through the cold nights became the heart of their people. They had to protect it from rain, from wind, and from being forgotten. A single mistake could mean freezing or death. Fire was fragile, and so were the lives that depended on it. But through shared effort, humans learned something no other creature truly mastered: trust. Someone had to sleep while another watched. Someone had to gather wood while others hunted or cared for children. Fire taught us that survival was not a solitary act, but a shared one. And as the flames burned, another kind of warmth spread among them, the warmth of story. With predators kept at bay and time to rest, our ancestors began to speak. They shared what they saw, what they feared, and what they dreamed. Words painted pictures that connected minds. A spark of imagination leaped from one person to another, carrying lessons across generations. Around the fire, the world grew larger, and so did our sense of belonging. Myths were born there, along with laughter and song. Children listened, learning not just how to hunt or build, but how to feel wonder. Fire turned chaos into community. It gave rhythm to life. Night after night, those small gatherings shaped the first forms of culture. The firekeeper's duty became sacred, a symbol of continuity in a world that could vanish overnight. The fire became our heart, and the storytellers became our memory. The night watchers listened to the cries of animals, the whispers of wind, and the beating of their own hearts. They learned to see meaning in sound and movement, to read the darkness like a language. Together they kept the tribe alive, not just through strength, but through connection. When you stare into a campfire today, you are looking at the same light that shaped the human soul. It is the light of protection, of story, of shared hope. Firekeepers and night watchers made sure that even when the world outside was filled with fear, the world within the circle stayed alive. That is where humanity learned what it truly meant to be one. There was a time when we were not hunters, but hunted. Long before humans ruled the earth, we lived in constant fear of the night. The darkness was filled with eyes that glowed and teeth that flashed. Saber-tooths prowled the plains, their jaws built to crush bone. Hyenas with jaws stronger than steel laughed in the distance, and giant birds hunted from the shadows. To be human, then, was to live small, cautious, and alert. Every sound could mean death. Every rustle in the grass could end a life. Night was not a time for dreaming. It was a test of endurance. When the sun disappeared, our ancestors huddled together in caves or among the trees, their hearts pounding with every cry in the dark. They did not yet command fire or weapons strong enough to fight back. Their best defense was unity. They learned that to survive, they had to become each other's eyes and ears. One would stay awake while others rested, listening for movement, feeling for vibrations in the ground. If danger approached, they alerted the group with quiet signals or the soft throw of a pebble. It was this shared vigilance that kept them alive through countless generations. Fear was not their weakness, it was their teacher. It taught them awareness, strategy, and the importance of community. Even as they lived in the shadows of predators, they began to understand the patterns of the hunt. They noticed when the great cats moved, when the scavengers followed, and when it was safe to emerge. Knowledge became their secret weapon, passed down not through writing but through whispers and memory. Slowly, fear turned into intelligence. But the danger never faded. The night was a constant reminder that the world belonged to creatures stronger and faster than us. The only advantage humans had was each other. They learned to cooperate, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. One distracted the predator while others escaped. One gathered food while another kept watch. This instinct to protect the group above the self became the foundation of what we now call empathy. When the first fires began to glow on the plains, the balance began to shift. The same predators that once stalked us now watched from a distance, wary of the strange new light. For the first time, our ancestors could sleep without trembling, but the memory of those early nights never left us. It still lingers deep within our minds, in the instinct to check the dark corners of a room or flinch at sudden sounds. That is the echo of the time when we were prey. The age of predators shaped the heart of humanity. It taught us that survival was not about power, but about connection, trust, and the courage to face the dark together. The night no longer owns us, but it remembers, and somewhere deep inside, so do we. Long before writing, before language or history, our ancestors found a way to leave memory behind. It was not written on paper or carved in symbols. It was shaped in stone. The first tools were more than survival devices. They were messages passed from one generation to the next, silent teachers that carried knowledge across time. A sharpened edge told a story. A broken flake showed how to strike, how to hold, how to think. Each tool was a lesson, proof that the maker had learned something worth remembering. In a world where life was short and uncertain, these small stones became the first form of immortality. Imagine a young hunter watching an elder chip away at a rock, the sound echoing through a valley. Each strike had purpose. A single mistake could ruin the piece, but a perfect hit transformed it into a blade sharp enough to cut through bone. That sound was the heartbeat of evolution. Through repetition and patience, the knowledge spread. A stone tool made by one person could outlive its maker, found and used by another years later. It was as if the mind of the first craftsman reached through time to guide the hands of the next. This was the beginning of human memory that existed outside the body. Stone tools were the first technology, but they were also the first teachers. Every shape held evidence of thought, of planning, of creativity. They showed that the mind was learning not just to react, but to design. Over thousands of years, these tools evolved. They became more refined, more complex, each generation adding something new. Handles were attached, points were sharpened, and different stones were chosen for different tasks. The making of tools turned survival into an art. But it was also the start of something deeper. the ability to share knowledge that outlived the individual. That idea changed everything. It meant that humanity no longer depended only on instinct or genetics. Wisdom could now be built, stored, and improved upon. The tools remembered what people could not. Even when a tribe vanished, their creations remained, scattered across the earth like breadcrumbs of memory. To pick up one of those stones today is to hold a thought that was born hundreds of thousands of years ago. It is a reminder that progress began with curiosity and the courage to experiment. Those who made the first tools did not know they were shaping the future. They were only trying to survive another day, yet in doing so, they gave us the foundation of learning itself. The stone tools were our first teachers, our first books, our first proof that ideas could live beyond flesh and bone. They turned survival into story, and in their silent weight, they still whisper that to remember is to remain. There was a time when the world turned white. The sun grew weaker, the winds colder, and the earth itself seemed to fall asleep beneath a blanket of endless snow. It was the age we now call the Ice Ages, a series of winters so long and brutal that entire species vanished. Forests froze, rivers turned to glass, even the air burned with cold. For early humans, survival became a daily battle against a planet that no longer seemed to want them. The warmth of the tropics faded, and glaciers crept across the continents, swallowing the land in silence. Hunting became harder. Food was scarce. Every breath stung the lungs, and every step through the snow could mean life or death. Many tribes disappeared without a trace, lost to hunger, frost, and exhaustion. Yet a few endured. In small groups scattered across Africa, Europe, and Asia, humans found ways to adapt. They learned to build shelters from bones and hides, to wrap themselves in animal fur, and to make fires that burned all through the night. They hunted together, moving like shadows across the frozen plains, tracking mammoths and reindeer that roamed in search of food. These were not warriors or conquerors. They were survivors, bound together by trust and necessity. In the darkness of those long winters, the bond between people grew stronger than ever. Fire became more than warmth, it became hope. The glow of its light was a promise that even in the coldest night, life still burned. Families gathered close, sharing what little they had. Stories replaced daylight. Myths were born in the flicker of the flames, tales of spirits that controlled the wind and gods that guarded the fire. It was during this time that humanity learned the meaning of endurance. The cold did not just test their bodies, it tested their hearts. Those who gave up vanished, those who believed endured. The Ice Ages carved resilience into our blood. They forced us to think ahead, to plan for seasons, to protect one another. They also shaped our minds. Faced with death on every side, humans began to imagine, to dream of warmth, and to create symbols of hope. Cave paintings from this era show not just animals but ideas, visions of life beyond struggle. Even when everything froze, the human spirit refused to. When the great thaw finally came and the ice began to retreat, the world awoke to a new kind of being. Humans had survived what nature had thrown at them. They had stared into the endless winter and found within themselves a light that would not die. That light is still inside us today. Every challenge we face carries the echo of those who endured the cold when all seemed lost. The long winter did not end us. It revealed who we really are. There was a time when we were not alone. The world once held many kinds of humans, each walking their own path through the ancient forests and frozen plains. Long before cities and kingdoms, before names and nations, we shared the earth with others who were like us, but not quite us. The Neanderthals lived in the cold lands of Europe, strong and powerful, with eyes that saw through blizzards and hands built for carving stone. Farther east, the Denisovans roamed the mountains of Asia, mysterious and elusive, leaving behind only fragments of bone and traces of their breath in our blood. There were others too, smaller ones who lived on islands, shaped by isolation and time. The world of our ancestors was not empty, it was crowded with cousins. For tens of thousands of years, we met them in valleys and caves, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as friends. These encounters were not always violent. Some ended in understanding, in shared fires and exchanged tools. Others ended in silence. What makes this part of our story so haunting is that their faces were not so different from ours. If one of them stood before you today, cleaned and dressed, you might mistake them for a stranger on the street. Yet, over time, one by one, they disappeared. The reasons remain a mystery. Some say it was competition for food and shelter. Others believe climate shifts erased their homes. And some think that it was not destruction but absorption, that they became part of us in the most intimate way possible. Modern science has proven that the blood of Neanderthals and Denisovans still flows through us. Pieces of their DNA shape how we breathe, fight disease, and even dream. They are not gone. They live quietly in our cells, ghosts written in code. But back then, when our ancestors walked beside them, the world was on the edge of change. The Homo sapiens were different in ways that went beyond muscle or bone. They carried something invisible but powerful, the spark of imagination. They could tell stories, plan hunts, and paint the walls of caves with visions of animals and gods. They built symbols, shared meaning, and created culture. That might have been the difference that tipped the balance. The other humans had strength, but we had dreams. Still, we owe them everything. They taught us how to survive the cold, how to use the land, how to adapt to places we had never seen before. Without them, our journey would have ended long ago. When we look at their fossils today, we are not looking at extinct strangers, we are looking at family. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and all the others are the forgotten chapters of our story. They remind us that humanity was never a single path, but a web of lives intertwined. We are the last survivors of that ancient family, carrying their memory in every heartbeat. There came a time when the world that had once felt endless began to seem small. The valleys, the forests, and the plains that had sheltered our ancestors were no longer enough. Curiosity and hunger pushed them farther than ever before. Humans began to wander, not just across land, but across oceans. It is hard to imagine the courage it took to step into a world without maps, without knowing what waited beyond the horizon. Yet somehow, they did it. They became the first ocean crossers, the explorers of a planet still half asleep. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the idea of ships or compasses, small bands of humans built rafts from reeds and wood, held together with vines and hope. They followed the stars, the wind, and the flight of birds. They read the ocean like a living book, learning the rhythm of waves, the pull of currents, and the way clouds gathered over distant land. Many must have been lost to storms and silence, but some made it. Each new island, each new shore, became a miracle of arrival. Step by step, voyage by voyage, humans spread across the globe. From Africa to the Middle East, from Asia to Australia, and eventually, across the frozen bridges that led to the Americas, we moved like rivers of life flowing in every direction. What makes this even more incredible is how unlikely it all was. Crossing vast oceans in primitive boats should have been impossible, yet it happened again and again. Our ancestors learned to see patterns in chaos, to sense direction by smell, by the way the air felt against their skin. They were scientists without knowing it, explorers without intention, guided by instinct and imagination. Every migration was a gamble, but it was also a promise. Wherever humans went, they carried fire, language, and memory. They brought stories of where they came from, songs to calm the sea, and rituals to thank the sky. The ocean became both a barrier and a bridge, separating and connecting us at once. Over generations, these journeys created new cultures, new languages, and new ways of life. Humans adapted to everything the earth offered, from deserts to jungles to frozen tundra. They learned that the world could be crossed, that no distance was too great when survival demanded movement. What started as a search for food became a quest for meaning. The courage of those early travelers shaped our destiny. Their footsteps and paddle strokes drew the first lines of the human map. Every continent holds traces of their passage, bones buried in beaches and tools found beneath layers of sand. The ocean crossers proved that humanity was not meant to stay still. We are wanderers by nature, driven by something deeper than need. Perhaps it was not just survival that guided them, but wonder, the same wonder that still draws us to look at the stars and imagine what lies beyond. 75,000 years ago, the Earth experienced one of its most terrifying moments. In what is now Indonesia, a volcano named Toba erupted with a force that defied imagination. It was not just an explosion, it was the sound of the planet tearing itself open. The sky filled with ash, fire rained from above, and the ground trembled for days. Entire mountains vanished. The eruption sent so much dust into the atmosphere that sunlight disappeared. The world entered what scientists call a volcanic winter. Temperatures dropped across the globe, crops failed, and animals died in silence. For early humans, who were already few in number, it was a nightmare beyond anything they had ever faced. Darkness covered the land for years. Days and nights blurred together beneath a red and grey sky. The air smelled of smoke and death. Food was almost impossible to find. Rivers froze, plants withered, and the animals they depended on vanished. Some scientists believe that humanity was reduced to only a few thousand survivors scattered across Africa and Asia. That is smaller than a modern town. Imagine the weight of that moment, when everything humanity had become balanced on the edge of extinction. A single bad season could have ended it all, and yet, somehow, it did not. In the middle of the ash and ruin, life refused to die. Small groups found ways to adapt. They dug for roots, hunted what little remained, and sheltered near coasts where fish and shellfish still provided food. Families huddled together in caves, their fires flickering against walls stained black with soot. Those flames became the difference between death and endurance. Fire gave light, warmth, and hope. It became a symbol of defiance against a world that seemed to want silence. The Toba eruption changed the earth, but it also changed us. It forced humanity to become resilient beyond measure. It taught us to plan, to cooperate, and to think not just about surviving the day, but surviving generations. The people who lived through that catastrophe passed their strength down through time. Every human alive today carries a piece of their victory. The memory of that dark age is still hidden in our DNA, written in the patterns of who we are. Even the word night in this story means more than darkness. It represents the unknown, the fear that life could end without warning. But every night ends, and so did Toba's shadow. Slowly, the ash settled, the air cleared, and the world came back to life. Plants returned, animals repopulated, and humans began again. When we look at volcanoes today, it is easy to see them as symbols of destruction, but Toba's eruption is also a symbol of survival. It reminds us that we come from people who endured the impossible. The Toba night could have been the end of humanity, but instead it became proof that even when the world falls apart, life will find a way to rise again. Long before books or songs or kingdoms, there was the sound of human voices carried through the night. It began around the fire, where survival and silence once ruled. In those early days, sound was everything. A single cry could mean danger, a whisper could save a life. But over time, those sounds began to change. They were no longer just warnings or calls. They became something more. They became words. The birth of language did not happen in a single moment. It grew slowly, shaped by need. Early humans had to cooperate to hunt, to move, and to protect one another. Simple gestures and grunts were not enough. They needed to share ideas, to plan ahead, to describe what they saw. Around the firelight, where the darkness pressed close, they began to give meaning to sound. Each word was a spark, lighting up thought in another person's mind. That was the beginning of connection. Imagine a group of hunters returning from the plains, their faces lit by the glow of flame. They act out what happened, showing how an animal moved, how the wind shifted, how danger came. Others listen, then repeat, adding their own sounds and symbols. A shared understanding grows. This was not just communication, it was the first form of storytelling. Through language, knowledge no longer had to die with the individual. It could be passed on, refined, and remembered. The fire became a classroom, a stage, and a home. In its light, humans learned to speak of the world, to name the stars, and to imagine beyond what they could see. Language gave shape to dreams. It allowed people to describe what could be, not just what was. That ability changed everything. It made planning possible, teaching easier, and relationships deeper. It turned strangers into families, and families into tribes. The rhythm of speech began to mirror the rhythm of life itself, with pauses like breaths and tones like the rise and fall of emotion. From these ancient gatherings, the seeds of civilization were planted. With words, humans could build beyond instinct. They could share belief, memory, and hope. They could tell of ancestors and gods, of lessons learned and warnings remembered. Language became both a tool and a torch, carrying thought through generations. Even today, the echo of that first spark lives within us. Every conversation, every story, every song is part of the same fire that once flickered in the darkness of prehistory. The connection between firelight and language is no coincidence. Both are forms of illumination. Both drive away the night. When our ancestors spoke their first true words, they were not just surviving, they were creating meaning. And in that moment, humanity found its voice, a voice that still burns as brightly as the flames that first inspired it. There came a time when survival alone was no longer enough. Our ancestors began to see meaning in the world around them, to sense that life was not just a struggle for food or shelter, but part of something greater. It began quietly, in the dark chambers of caves and the stillness of night. There, under flickering firelight, they painted. They covered stone walls with images of animals, hunters, and symbols that no one can fully understand today. These were not decorations. They were acts of faith. Each stroke of colour, each outline of a hand pressed against the rock, was a message to something beyond themselves. These paintings were the first prayers. They believed that by recreating the hunt in images, they could control it, that the spirit of the animal would return and offer itself again. In these moments, the human mind crossed a threshold. We became creatures not just of instinct, but of imagination. The same hands that once shaped stone tools now shaped meaning. Burial rituals began to appear, showing a deep change in the way our ancestors viewed life and death. They placed the dead carefully in the earth, sometimes with flowers or objects. This was the first sign that humans understood loss and believed in what could not be seen. Death was no longer the end, it became a passage. Somewhere between the hunt and the firelight, the idea of gods was born. They may not have had names, but their presence was felt in thunder, in wind, and in the glowing eyes of animals. The world became sacred, alive with power and mystery. The hunters who once moved silently through forests now whispered to unseen forces, asking for luck, strength, and mercy. The gods of the hunt were reflections of their fears and hopes, shaped by the endless balance between life and death. To honor them was to survive another day. To forget them was to risk the unknown. These early beliefs united people in purpose. They gave meaning to struggle and inspired courage in the face of danger. art and ritual became language for the soul. In the glow of torches, humans danced, sang, and told stories that tied them together. For the first time, they were not just surviving as individuals, they were living as a people. The dawn of symbolic thinking changed everything. It gave rise to creativity, morality, and the beginnings of culture. It taught us that imagination is not a luxury, it is a form of survival. The paintings, the burials, the whispered prayers all tell us one thing. Our ancestors looked at the world and saw more than what was visible. They saw mystery and meaning in every shadow. And from that vision came the first spark of what it truly means to be human. There was an age when the earth seemed to turn against us. The rains stopped falling, the rivers dried up, and the animals that once filled the plains vanished. The world entered a long season of hunger and hardship that would shape the future of our species. It was the age of scarcity. For countless generations, survival hung by a thread. Entire tribes wandered for weeks without food, watching the sky for signs of mercy that never came. Children grew weaker, elders faded, and fear became as common as breath. Yet, out of this struggle, something extraordinary began to happen. Scarcity became the forge of creativity. When the old ways failed, humans were forced to invent new ones. They learned to dig deeper for roots, to grind seeds into meal, to build traps, and to store food for the first time. Hunger sharpened the mind as much as it thinned the body. Each new challenge became a question, and every solution pushed the limits of imagination. In this constant testing, humanity discovered its most powerful weapon, adaptability. The climate itself became unpredictable. Sometimes the earth burned with heat, and other times the frost crept down from the mountains. Every shift demanded change. Those who stayed the same perished. Those who learned to adjust endured. It was during this time that the seeds of agriculture were unknowingly planted. People began to notice that plants grew again where seeds had fallen, that some grains could be gathered before the rains and saved for later. These small observations slowly grew into the first steps toward farming, though it would take thousands of years before the idea truly bloomed. Scarcity did not only change how we ate, it changed how we thought. It taught humans the value of sharing, of storing knowledge as carefully as food. Storytelling became a way to remember what worked and what failed. Around the fire, parents told children about the seasons, the stars, and the lessons written in hunger. These lessons turned into wisdom, and wisdom became culture. The constant struggle made us curious, cautious, and brave. It also made us compassionate. In the face of famine, cooperation was no longer a choice. A tribe that hoarded food died alone, but one that shared could endure. The pressure of scarcity taught humanity that survival was stronger when faced together. Out of starvation came generosity. Out of fear came community. It is easy to see scarcity as only suffering, but it was also the greatest teacher the world ever gave us. It stripped away comfort and forced us to imagine something better. Every tool, every shelter, every plan began as a response to need. The age of scarcity forged the human spirit. It proved that creativity is born not in luxury, but in desperation. And from that desperation came the first sparks of civilization. Before writing, before ink and paper, there was memory. The first humans carried the past in their minds, passing it from mouth to mouth, from fire to fire. Storytelling was how they remembered the world, how they kept lessons alive long after the ones who learned them were gone. A story was more than entertainment. It was a map, a warning, a guide. It told people when to travel, when to plant, when to fear the wind, and when to follow it. Memory was survival. In a world without books, every word mattered. Around the firelight, elders became living libraries. They told of hunts and floods, of victories and mistakes. The young listened, not just with curiosity, but with hunger, because forgetting meant danger. A forgotten story could cost lives. So the tales grew stronger with each telling, shaped by rhythm and repetition, so they would not fade. The birth of memory was also the birth of culture. Through stories, people began to understand not only how to survive, but how to live. Morality took root in words. Heroes and villains appeared, not as entertainment, but as lessons. Stories taught kindness, loyalty, and courage. They warned against greed and betrayal. They were the first moral code, passed down through generations long before laws were written. Even myths carried truth, hidden inside symbols and wonder. A story about the sun dying each night and rising again was not just myth. It was memory, disguised as meaning. It reminded people that darkness was temporary, that even after loss, light returns. This was the power of story. It made ideas eternal. When someone died, their body was lost, but their words could live on. Memory gave humanity a kind of immortality. The storyteller became as important as the hunter, because their words could save a tribe just as surely as a spear. And as language evolved, so did the stories. They grew deeper, layered with meaning, carrying both history and hope. Each generation added their own voice, shaping the tale to fit their time while keeping its heart the same. Through this, humanity began to build a shared identity. Stories were not just about individuals, but about us, all of us, connected through the same lessons. They turned experience into wisdom, and wisdom into culture. The birth of memory turned sound into legacy. Even now, thousands of years later, we are still shaped by the same instinct. Every movie, every book, every song is just a new form of that ancient desire to remember. Storytelling was never just about words. It was about keeping the fire of humanity alive. The people who spoke those first stories may be gone, but their voices echo still in us. They proved that as long as we remember, we never truly disappear. The Ice Age ended, and with it came a new dawn. The air grew warmer, the glaciers melted, and the earth began to bloom again. It was the start of what scientists call the Holocene, the age of humans. For the first time, the world seemed calm. Crops grew in the soil, rivers fed villages, and people began to settle instead of wander. Yet beneath this peace, danger never truly disappeared. The fight against extinction did not end when the ice retreated. It simply changed form. The threats that once came from teeth and claws now came from nature itself, from disease, from floods, and from the fragile balance of the world we were just beginning to shape. Civilizations rose from the earth like miracles, built by hands that remembered hunger and fear. Villages turned into cities, and cities turned into empires. But every time humans built something great, the darkness waited just beyond the light. Floods swept away entire regions. Volcanoes buried towns beneath ash. Plagues spread faster than armies, taking the strong and the weak alike. What had once been the fear of predators became the fear of unseen enemies. In the ancient cities of Mesopotamia and Egypt, sickness could strike without warning. Crops would fail, rivers would dry, and famine would return like a curse. People prayed to gods, not knowing that the real battle was not against spirits, but against the limits of survival itself. Even in times of peace, the earth reminded humanity that it was never truly safe. Storms shattered ships. Earthquakes tore the ground apart. Each disaster forced people to rebuild, to learn, and to remember. The same instincts that had carried our ancestors through the Ice Age were still alive, hidden beneath our new world of stone and fire. Cooperation, creativity, and hope remained the only real weapons we had. Every time the darkness struck, humanity answered by growing stronger. We built walls to hold back water, systems to store grain, and medicine to fight invisible killers. We learned to predict the movement of stars, to measure time, to plan for the future, but the struggle never ended. The Holocene was not just an age of progress, it was an age of endurance. Even now, every civilization carries the memory of collapse within it, a quiet reminder that nature can still take everything away. Yet, the miracle of humanity is that we never stop fighting. Against every flood, every sickness, every failure, we rise again. The same fire that once burned in the caves still burns in our cities. We light it to hold back the night, to remind ourselves that the darkness has never truly won. The Holocene is not just our time, it is our test. We are still the children of survivors, standing at the edge of uncertainty, refusing to give in. The fight against extinction never ended. It simply became the story of who we are. When you look up at the night sky, it is easy to feel small, but the truth is far stranger. The fact that we even exist to look at those stars is one of the greatest coincidences in the universe. Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought is possible only because an impossible chain of events lined up perfectly. We are the winners of a cosmic lottery that began billions of years ago. If even one number had fallen differently, there would be no life, no Earth, no story at all. Our planet orbits the Sun at a distance so precise that it allows water to remain liquid. A little closer, and the oceans would boil. A little farther, and they would freeze forever. The Moon, born from a massive collision long before humans existed, keeps our planet steady as it spins. Without that balance, the Earth would wobble, tilting wildly, turning seasons into chaos. The air we breathe, the sunlight that warms us, and the magnetic field that shields us from deadly cosmic radiation are all results of fragile perfection. Every element that makes up your body was forged in the heart of a dying star. Long before the first human drew breath, the atoms of your blood were scattered across space, waiting to come together again. The universe had to create suns, destroy them, and rebuild worlds before life could even begin. It is humbling to realize how rare this balance is. The galaxy is filled with countless stars, yet we have found no other place quite like this one. The odds that a planet would form with the right ingredients, the right atmosphere, and the right distance are beyond imagination. It is as if the cosmos rolled its dice again and again, and somehow, against all reason, they landed on life. Even the dangers that once threatened to end us, like meteor impacts and radiation bursts, may have played a role in shaping evolution. A touch of destruction, just enough to challenge life without erasing it, may have been the force that pushed it forward. Without those near disasters, intelligence might never have evolved. It is strange to think that extinction and survival are both written into the same code. The universe is not kind, yet somehow it has given us a home. For billions of years, stars have lived and died, and through that chaos, order emerged. We are not apart from that story. We are its continuation. Every human being is a piece of the cosmos that learned to think. When you look at the stars, you are seeing your own reflection written in light. The cosmic lottery is not about luck alone. It is about the persistence of creation itself. Against infinite darkness, life found a way to shine, and in that light, we became aware enough to ask why. Every person alive today is the result of an unbroken chain stretching back through time. Each heartbeat you feel, each breath you take, exists because billions of ancestors survived long enough to pass life forward. The odds against that are beyond imagination. Every war, every famine, every storm, every accident that could have erased a single life did not. Somehow, through all the chaos and chance, you made it here. You are the outcome of victories you never saw, of choices made by people whose names you will never know. From the first cell that divided in the ancient sea to the first human who looked at the stars, your story has been in motion for billions of years. The thread that connects you to them is fragile, but it has never broken. It has stretched through time, bending but never snapping. Every ancestor who lived before you faced moments where everything could have ended. They fled from predators, starved through winters, endured drought, disease, and disaster. Some fought, some hid, some prayed to gods we have forgotten. Yet each one carried the story one step farther until it reached you. Even the smallest details of your existence are the result of impossible odds. If one ancestor had died before meeting another, if one chance encounter had not happened, if one storm had struck differently, you would not be here. You are living proof that survival is not an accident. It is a pattern of persistence, repeated billions of times. That is what makes this moment, the fragile thread of now, so powerful. We live in a world of noise and speed, yet every second is built upon ages of struggle and endurance. To exist is to stand on the edge of a miracle. The line could have ended countless times, but it did not. It kept weaving through time, through every birth and every loss, until it became you. The same blood that ran through those who painted on cave walls runs through you. The same instincts that guided them to build fires and tell stories still whisper in your heart. You are not separate from them. You are their continuation. The world may feel uncertain, but so did theirs. They too faced fear, doubt, and change. What kept them alive was the same thing that keeps you moving now, the quiet will to endure. The thread of life has always been fragile, but that is what makes it sacred. When you look at your reflection, you are seeing the result of an unbroken miracle. Every breath is a memory of survival. Every heartbeat is a reminder that you are part of something vast and unstoppable. The fragile thread of now is not just your story, it is the story of everything that refused to vanish. From the moment life first stirred in the ancient seas to this very second, one truth has remained constant. We have continued. Through fire and ice, through hunger and war, through silence and chaos, the line of life has never truly broken. The fact that we exist at all is beyond reason. It is a miracle written not in light or prophecy, but in persistence. Every creature that came before us played a part in this great chain of being. Every cell that divided, every breath that carried forward, was another step in the story of continuity. The earth has ended countless times, and yet it has always begun again. We are standing in the latest chapter of that impossible survival. When we look at the world today, it is easy to forget how rare and fragile this moment truly is. We build and destroy, rush and forget, living as if existence were ordinary. But nothing about being alive is ordinary. Every heartbeat is a defiance of entropy, a quiet victory over the cold emptiness of space. To be human is to be part of something sacred, not because we were chosen, but because we endured. We are the children of stars that burned out billions of years ago, the descendants of wanderers who crossed oceans and deserts. We are the voice of every ancestor who refused to give up. Their strength flows in us still. The miracle of continuance is not about perfection. It is about endurance. It is about rising after every fall, rebuilding after every ruin, and remembering that life has never needed certainty to keep going. The world has faced extinction again and again, but life always finds a way to return. That is the great truth hidden in the fabric of existence. The same energy that moves the galaxies also moves within us. We are not separate from the universe. We are its expression, its experiment in awareness. To recognize this is to understand that every moment is sacred. Every sunrise, every breath, every act of kindness is part of the same unbroken story. Humanity is not permanent, but the will to live, to love, to create, and to remember has proven stronger than anything that tried to erase it. One day, our time may end, but something will rise from what we leave behind. The miracle will continue, just as it always has. When you look at the night sky, remember that you are looking into the past, into the stars that made you. And when you look at your own hands, remember that you are holding the future. The miracle of continuance is not about avoiding extinction. It is about embracing existence with awe. It is knowing that against all odds, we are here. And that, more than anything, is reason enough to wonder.